This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, and welcome everybody. I make that 9:31. Let's get started. And a very warm welcome to all of you joining this morning. And it is a warm welcome as the temperature heats up outside. Just a reminder that all these sessions are recorded and will appear on our YouTube channel later on today. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, please go to our YouTube channel, which is at Harts Limited, with limited spelt in full, and you'll be able to catch up on anything that you've missed previously. We're also love you to follow us on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and just type in Harts, we'd be delighted if you could follow us, because all the details of everything else appears on our LinkedIn page as well. Anyone who's joining us, please can you just mute yourself and make sure that any background noise is off. That will be great. And please make use of the chat box. You'll see a speech bubble and you can click on that and type in any questions that you like. If you're feeling brave enough, you can unmute yourself and shout out a question. I'm sure Chris or Karen will be delighted to take your questions. Feel free to do that. And just before we actually get going, we just have to read our disclaimer. And the following presentation is produced for general guidance only, and professional advice should always be sought before any transaction is undertaken. Individual circumstances can vary, and therefore no responsibility can be accepted by Harts Limited or any of their affiliates for any action taken or any decision made to refrain from action by attendees of this presentation. Okay, what I'd like to do first of all is, so you can get used to using this chat box, I've just got a quick question for everybody. Something which is pretty topical is, should the government delay June the 21st and delay it by a couple of weeks? If you think the answer to that is yes, because of what's been going on with the rise in cases, then put a yes in the chat box. Just have a quick straw poll. And if you think the answer should no, we should reopen everything by the 21st of June, if you could just stick no in the chat box, and let's see what sort of answers that we get. And got the answers. It's all down to the data. That's fine. And absolutely not. We've got quite a few no's, and we've got a few yeses. So we've got quite a few no's in there, but not many people have answered. Come on, don't be shy. Put your answer in the chat box. It's a yes or a no. And let's have this straw poll, and we can update you to the answers later on. We're looking like a majority for no's at the moment. Okay, moving on. What I'd like to do as well is, just before we get going on to grants, give you a quick government support update. And what I'd like to do is just got 3 points there really. If you deferred your VAT from last year for the 1 quarter or the 3 monthlies, if you were on a monthly, the deadline for applying the interest-free deferral of VAT from last year is the 21st of June. So that's just under 2 weeks' time. Alternatively, you can contact HMRC for time to pay by the 30th of June. However, if you miss both of these deadlines, there is potentially interest to charge and maybe a 5% penalty as well, rather than an interest-free direct debit over the period to January next year. So if you haven't made an arrangement to pay that deferred VAT, you should do so pretty quickly. Second point is in relation to furlough. As from the 1st of July, employers have to start making a contribution of 10%. And 1st of August, they have to make a contribution of 20%. So if you do have employees still on furlough, then you will, as an employer, have to start making contributions to that cost. And then the final point I want to make is one which is often overlooked just at the moment. Companies House, as part of their COVID support, gave you 12 months instead of 9 months to file your accounts at Companies House. That ends at the end of this month. So 30th of June 20 is your last year end, where you have a 12-month filing deadline. So if your year end is July, it reverts back to 9 months. So please don't send in your books to us very, very late. It just puts loads of pressure on us. It's now back to where we were previously. Get your information in and we can get your results out. So that's a quick government support update. What I'd like to do now is introduce you to Chris Parkhurst and Karen Taylor from CATAX, and I'm going to make Chris the presenter. Okay, so Chris is now the presenter, and he's going to talk to us about grants. So over to you, Chris.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Now, this worked earlier when we shared it, and now it's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, it will do. I'm sure it will do.
So
there you go. Perfect.
All good.
Right, brilliant. That's coming up then, is it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I had a bit of a moment. I pressed share and nothing came up. So just wanted to make sure. So firstly, thanks everyone for coming this morning. My name's Chris Parkhurst. I'm the Regional Development Director for grants here at CATAX. I work on the business development side, and I've been working in both UK and European grant funding for the last 8 or so years now. I'm here with with the head of grants, Karen Taylor. Also been working in grants for longer than I have. So the idea of today is to give you an overview of how grant funding works, the sort of things that are available, and the types of clients that can kind of access funding. So what we're going to go through is what we do, obviously very important, types available, the eligibility of companies for grants, a little bit about how they work with grants. Each different funding area works in its own different way, but what we're going to try and do is give you an average of how they all work, and talk about some of the types of available grants that are live now or have been or will be live, and the types of companies that can go for them. So if we go straight in, CATAX, I don't know how many of you know about CATAX, but CATAX for the last 12 years we've become experts in tax relief and grant funding services. We've identified over $250 million in tax benefit and grant benefit for clients to date. The headquarters is in Manchester, offices, as you can see, all over the world and the Channel Islands, and we work primarily on the grants with businesses in the UK. We've got a large team, 100 in-house experts, bid writers, surveyors, tax technicians, accountants, report writers, case managers. So we've got all the skills and expertise in-house to be able to work with R&D, to be able to work on grants, different clients in different industry sectors, essentially. So going on to the grants with ourselves. So what we do, sorry, these slides are a little bit out of order, I've just realised. I'll start with that one and go back. So UK grant funding. So essentially with UK grant funding, UK businesses can compete for government-backed funding to research and develop new processes, new products, new services, test new innovation ideas, and collaborate with other organisations, either in industry or academia. We deal with the main funding pots in the UK and Europe. So in the UK, your main ones are such as Innovate UK, local enterprise partnerships, and in Europe, you've got things like Horizon Europe. All these grants vary differently compared to the industry sector, the type of company and the type of project. But all of these national grants are there for new innovation, new ideas and processes. So in terms of what we do initially when we talk to a client, the first thing we do is a fact-finding call with the client. Is what are they doing? What is their business? What is their industry? How do they want to progress? What we then do is we go away, we identify potential grant funding calls that are specific and achievable for that client and that project, and we can then work with them to scope out a plan and a budget for the call. So we need to almost spend the money on paper for the application. Then it moves over to Karen's expertise, which is working with them to write the application, structure an application and submit it and wait for a decision from the funding body. With pretty much all funding throughout the UK and Europe, it is an application process. So that initial process that we do with the client to understand not only what they do and is it grantable, but also what they do and what they would have to do to be grantable. A lot of companies don't really understand grant landscape because it is complicated. What we can do is map it out for them. They may not be ready right now, but they may be ready in 3 months or 6 months. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of our process and a little bit about the funding that's there. So with UK funding and European, they have what's called multiple different grand challenge areas. Now, these are the main competitions, the main areas where there's always some sort of funding around. And these are the things like electric vehicles, reducing emissions, resources, net zero, a healthy and aging society, innovation in farming, cybersecurity, AI, and future mobility. They're the main ones. And there's lots of different grants available in lots of different facets connected to those grand challenge areas. But there's also other ones that are there for different types of innovation. So we'll come on to in a minute SMART, which is the UK's Open Innovation Funding Programme. The funding pots in the UK are generally there for more early stage R&D in the hundreds of thousands of pounds into the low millions of pounds. And what we mean by the earlier stage R&D is it's from kind of the initial concept up to kind of demonstrator level is what we're saying by the early stage R&D. The good thing about the UK is we can still access European funding much in the same way as we always have done with the EU's Horizon Europe programme. That is there generally for later stage projects, the demonstrators, the pilots, the pilot lines. The main differences between UK and EU funding is with EU funding, the projects are for the later stage, but they're also larger. The grants start at €500,000 and they have an average between 2 and 6 million. But all of them, they follow that common theme that they're aimed at a project that they want to solve challenges within an industry, within society. What is the problem a project's going to solve? The other thing you can do with grants is you can bring in partners, you can bring in industry or academia to add value to a project. A company may have identified a problem within its sector, within their industry, but they haven't necessarily got the skills or the expertise to be able to address that problem. So what they would do is they would bring in a partner into the project to add that value. So it doesn't mean that companies have got to focus purely on their R&D. They can bring someone else in to do that. So what we're going to do is we use the SMART grant that I mentioned earlier. That's the UK's Open Innovation Programme. What that does is it gives you a very good idea of how companies can access funding, the types of companies that can access it, and it gives a very good average of all the funding. SMART is, as I said, an open innovation program, so it is not focused on any particular industry sector or any particular market challenge or any one of those grand challenge areas that we mentioned earlier. This can be in any different industry sector. In terms of being eligible to apply and lead a SMART project, they've got to be a UK business of any size, research and technology organisation. They've got to carry out their R&D project activity in the UK. So in other words, money has to be spent in the UK. They have to commercially exploit the results from or in the UK. So if they're developing a new product, it's got to be for the UK market, or it could be for a European market, an American market, an Asian market. But as long as they're doing it from the UK, absolutely fine. If they want to work alone and not have any partners, they have to be an SME. If they are a large business or the research technology organisation and they want to have a project, they must include at least one SME as a partner. Putting partners together isn't hugely difficult. We just need to find someone who will add value to that project, that will make sense to bring that project forward. And as it says at the bottom, the different funding bodies, the different funding areas will have different criteria. But this is a very good basic sort of overview of not only SMART, but how most of the funding areas look at eligibility. If there's anything different, it will be specific to a funding area. But they're the main things. They're the main points to be able to apply for an Innovate grant. The size of project. So again, we'll use SMART, and it's pretty much split into two kind of types. So you've got Shorter projects between 6 and 18 months, they have to have total eligible project costs between £25,000 and £500,000. If they've got a bigger, a longer scale project, they go between 19 and 36 months. They can go then up to 2 million, and they must be collaborative. All of the funding pots have a particular budget. So if you're looking at a project on the high end of 2 million, they will be looking at the scale of the problem, the scale of the project, the scale of the impact of the project, but they'll also be looking at the partners as well. So for a longer project, even if you're an SME, you must have another SME or another industry or academia partner in order to be eligible to apply for that larger amount of money. So here we have for feasibility and feasibility in industrial research. And I'll come on to that in a moment. Feasibility is pretty much what it says on the tin. Industrial research is kind of the middle stages of product development or project development, and experimental development is those later stages. So if you're an SME, you could get up to a micro or small business, you can get up to 70% of total project costs, 60% for medium, and it goes obviously down if you're a larger business. The later stage projects, you get a smaller intervention rate. So for projects that are closer to market, 45, 35 and 25% respectively. So really to get the highest percentage of total project cost paid for by the grant, you want, ideally a client wants to be at those earlier stages. But even if the later stages, 45% of a £250,000 project is still a significant amount of money. What that means in terms of the percentage is if your company is looking at a grant or wants a grant with total project costs of £100,000, the grant would pay 70% of that. So you would get a grant of 70,000 for that project, and the other 30% would be what's called your contribution. You have to contribute that 30%. So these are the technology readiness levels which they use to measure whether a company is at feasibility or industrial research or experimental development. So what these mean in a nutshell is, one is those basic principles observed. It is the basic idea, the early stage, almost if you think university type research. And level 9 is you can go into a shop and buy it off the shelf, or you can download it. It's already out there, well known, well done. So 1, 2, and 3, that is the feasibility stage. 4, 5, and 6, 4, 2, 6 is that industrial research stage, and that's where you get the highest percentage of project costs. 7, 8, and 9, that is your experimental development stage. Now with funding, level 9 is pretty much ready out there in the market. So most experimental development will be 7 to 8, and that's the way they measure the level. So when a company is looking at what stage they're at, these are the levels they need to look at to decide where their technology is. So the costs they can put into a grant application, it is all project costs. It's labour, so staffing costs, who's going to be working on the project, how long are they going to be working on it, what materials do they need to do it. If they're building a widget, do they need to bring in materials to build that widget? Do they need subcontractors? And where the difference between partners and subcontractors comes in is generally, and the way I explain it is, partners, they add value to the project, they're working on the project, they're doing something integral to the project. Subcontractors could just be who are providing some support to it. Potentially they could be providing those materials, they could be providing manufacturing capacity, that sort of thing. Elements of CapEx can go into a project as well. Any equipment they need can go in. If we go use widgets as the example, if they need a piece of equipment to design a widget or test a widget or build a widget, some of that can go in. IP costs, they're very conscious that they want IP coming out of some of the projects, and if it is coming out, they want it protected. So you can claim around £7,500 to £9,000 towards protecting that IP as part of the grant. And things like travel and subsistence. So anything, if they're traveling between partners, if they're traveling to suppliers, you put a little budget in there for that sort of thing. So it is total project cost that we're looking at, especially at the outset. It is what do they want to do the project, and then we'll start structuring a budget from there of how much they need, the specifics of it, what they can and can't claim for, and then we'll work out a budget from there. So the nuts and bolts of how a grant works. So it is there for work that they haven't already done and the eligible costs associated with that work. They can't claim for a client can't claim for anything retrospectively. They can't claim for any work that they have already done. Now, what this means in a project is it doesn't mean they can't have already started a project. What they can do is they can continue a project as long as the activities within the application are ring fenced. So if you take a project from A to Z, if they've already worked as far as D, but they still need E, F, G, H, and the rest of the alphabet, they can do a grant application around that. It doesn't have to be from start to finish. It could be a particularly innovative or difficult part of a project that they're looking for funding for. And that's the key to that. So in terms of the application, we must set out the project, its objectives, its commercial strategy, along with a budget for the costs. And this is where the application can get quite in depth. It's not just a case of putting together what you want to do and how much you want for it. We've got to spend the money on paper. Why are they doing it? What is the impact? How are they going to commercialize it, and what are they going to spend the money on? What are the partners or subcontractors and why? One thing they will be looking at is if a client is doing a project, do they have the team in-house? Do they have the skills to do it? Do they have the resources internally? If they haven't, it's not always an issue. They can bring those in externally. And with the percentage of project costs, as I mentioned earlier, they will pay 70% of total eligible project costs unless they're a larger business. The other thing to bear in mind with grants is payments from the funding body are generally paid quarterly in arrears. So what that means is they will go through the process, be awarded their funding. They will then have to begin the project and claim the costs back quarterly and evidence the spend. The timescale is very important for any client looking for funding. From application, from submitting it, and from the deadline of the funding area. With UK funding, typically you are going to be waiting 3 months to find out if you have been successful. So, for instance, the last SMART deadline was the 26th of May last month. So we'll be looking around 3 months before we get the results of whether projects have been successful. So it's not always a quick process with grants. So the types of projects that we look at. So, and this isn't an exhaustive list, this is to give you an idea. So it's development of innovative new products, ideas, or services. And that's probably the key. It's the innovation. That's the key to getting grant funding. Things that are significantly improving current products or processes, improving the current state of the art. So it doesn't have to be a brand new, totally new product to the market. It could be, if we go back to widgets again, if everybody's got a widget and there's no innovation in widgets, but there's no such thing as a smart widget or a recyclable widget, that's an example of something that we are improving the current state of the art with a project. The other thing is projects, as I've said, addressing a need within an industry or a society. It could be manufacturing, a very energy intensive industrial process, and that's the way it's done, but they're looking to add technology or develop a new type of process that is more efficient, either with energy or raw materials, or a societal problem like the aging society or crime or homelessness, whatever it may be. They're looking to address a need. Early stage feasibility projects through to that proof of concept or demonstrator level. If they've already gone to the point where they're just about to launch to market, they are generally too late. And with using those TRL, using the TRL scales, the maximum TRL level that we can fund it, or that they will fund it, is up to a maximum of 6 on that scale. When we get into European funding, it's a different kettle. It is larger scale, as I mentioned, and it is for those later stages. So if a company's got to TRL 6, but they're in that what we call the valley of death between getting it out, proving that it works, and getting it to market, that's where EU funding can come in to help that commercialization, help that development, help demonstrate it on a wider scale. And it is for that, as I say, 6+. So those later stage projects we can look at European funding for without a problem. So the sort of things that we can't look at generally is sales and marketing activity. There's just nothing for sales and marketing, and we can't put it into a project. Even though you have to have a sort of a plan for commercialization and sales and marketing, we can't claim funding for it. Again, the already commercialized products, unless they're being significantly redeveloped. Internal software systems or app development. Generally, software and apps are the most difficult to get funded. So what we have to look at with any software or app is what is the impact of it. So for instance, and the easiest example to give is the NHS Track and Trace app. It is just an app, but it has a wide-ranging, significant impact, and there are innovative features in it. So when it comes to software or app development, what we're always going to be looking for is what is it going to do? What's the challenge it's addressing? What's the impact it's going to have? If a project is solely CapEx or bricks and mortar, so if they want extra manufacturing capacity, more warehouse space, more building space, they want to buy CNCs or presses or jigs or anything like that, there's generally not a lot we can do. It doesn't mean there isn't funding out there through the likes of things like your local LEPs. It's just something that we can't look at through the main funding bodies that we look at. So when we're talking to a potential client about grants, the first stage is, are they grant ready? And in order to be fundable, what we've got to ask them is, and some of this sounds very simple, but it is something a company needs to think of, thinking quite in depth, is what is their project? What is their idea? What it is they want to do, and why are they doing it? You know, it might be that they are just carrying on their internal development roadmap, in which case it's probably not always going to go far enough to get grant funding. So sometimes they need to sit down, sit with their idea and really go a little bit further for it. With this, the idea with grants is think big. When a company's coming up with their own idea, their own project plan, they're generally thinking of their own budget. They're trying to think within their own means, within their own skill set. When you're looking at a grant, you're not thinking of your own budget. You're working out how much you would need to really take this further, and who do they need to bring in to do it. The steps they need to accomplish it. So if they were going to take their project and break it down over 12 months, what do they need to do each month to actually do it? And another reason why we do this is because if they start looking at the steps, a project can look very differently at the end of it once they have broke down those steps, because they can come up with no end of ideas of how they can improve it and add and value that they can add to it. Their team, their company, do they have the team internally to do this? Do they need those external partners? One thing that any grant funding body will be looking at is the team. They will be looking at risk. Now, risk isn't always a bad thing within projects, but what they will be looking at is how are you mitigating that risk? So if you're the manufacturer of widgets and you want to make a smart widget, but you've got no skills in IoT, you bring in a company with IoT skills to add that value to it, and that would mitigate that risk of it going wrong. Their target market, again, very important. How are they going to commercialize it? Who are they selling it to? And do they have a business plan for it? One thing for all funding is they will need some sort of business plan. What is their plan for doing it? The other is to bear in mind that with it is 70% of project costs. Can they show that they can contribute 30% to the project and fund themselves in order to claim back the costs on a quarterly basis? Again, it's one thing once they've been awarded the funding, when the funding body is doing its due diligence, they will be looking at the company. Can they put this contribution in? This contribution can come from anywhere really. It can be investment, it can be from revenue, it can be out of their own pockets, director loans, wherever it's coming from, as long as they can show that yes, we can contribute those costs, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, thanks. That's got through very quick. So hopefully there's one or two people still awake. If anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, Chris, I'd like to ask a question if I may.
Go for it.
In terms of how that fits in with R&D, presumably the money that you've been granted you can't then claim on, but the other 30%, if you're getting a 70% grant, presumably you could afterwards then put in an R&D claim?
So yes and no. With any grant funded project, you can't claim R&D tax allowance under the SME scheme, but you can under the RDEC scheme post project. So the R&D would take a hit for that particular project. Anything outside of that project you can claim as normal, but that project activity you can only claim under the RDEC scheme. So you can only claim the sort of 9 point something %. It's kind of negated by the fact that you're getting a grant and you're getting the projects paid up front.
Okay.
Chris, can I ask about de minimis levels and what impact there may be, particularly for business within Northern Ireland?
I don't know is the short answer. Most grants, if they are de minimis, they will say they are de minimis. The others aren't. Essentially, it will say on any grant application, on any grant body, whether it is or isn't.
I think just on the de minimis side, I know one client last year, they had a sustainable innovation grant and that was de minimis, and that affected them when they were doing, is it SEIS and SEIS? No, they were setting up the company. So it is something to be mindful of, but predominantly a lot of the grant funding now is coming on under the state aid as opposed to de minimis, but they do pop up now and then, and it does have an impact, or it can have an impact depending on where you are in your investment cycle.
I've got a quick question for you as well. I know we've talked about some quite large grants. Do you know what is available maybe more locally? So for instance, because I know a lot of local authorities tend to open up grants and then close them again fairly quickly. Is it just worth keeping an eye on your local authority website to see what's available, or how would you recommend looking at those?
Definitely, yeah. I think for anyone who's looking for those regional ones, it's not something we typically deal with just because we can't. Like I say, they open and shut very quickly, and we just can't keep on top of them. The first port of call would also always be your local enterprise partnership, your local LEP, local business growth hub. Some of them are called different things, but keep an eye on your local authority website. You can set up alerts and RSS feeds to get that sort of thing straight away. But definitely your local enterprise partnership, business growth hub are going to be the best ones to advise you.
There's a new, there's the innovator changing slightly because obviously changes with the EU funding, but there's a grant call came out a couple of weeks ago that is aimed at the creative sector, and it's £25,000. It's part of the COVID funding, and it's actually to help that creative company, whether it's like music, design, video, to actually enter into a new market to generate new revenue. So we're starting to see different types of sort of grants even coming out through Innovate. They're aimed at really trying to stimulate demand, trying to stimulate growth. So that's a little one that's available at the moment. Like I say, £25,000, it gets paid up front, and it's 3 to 6 9-month projects for any creative business to sort of enter into new markets or develop new tech.
And again, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, we have a link with the Growth Hub for Warrington and for Cheshire. So if anybody's interested, I can put you in touch with the relevant person there at the Growth Hub. Anybody else got any questions they want to ask? Nothing so far. Okay, what I'm going to do, so feel free to stick something into the chat box if you want. If you don't want to unmute yourself, I'm just going to make myself the presenter again, and I just want to come on to our next webinar, our next event, which is taking place on the 22nd of June, and it's on the key drivers to business growth. I'll be presenting that, so you'll have to put up with me. And there'll also be 2 further webinars in July before we break until September, and the full details will be available shortly. Now, if you want to make suggestions of further webinars you'd like to see, or further presentations on anything you'd like to see, please just drop me a line. You ask Elisha at harts-ltd.com, or just phone the office on 01625 669 669, and we'll be able to have a chat and we'll see what we can put on for you. We do cover quite a lot, and we're open to pretty much everything these days. So if you've got any suggestions of anything you'd like to see, please get in touch. Finally, I'd just like to thank Chris for an excellent presentation, and Karen for the questions and answers as well. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm sure they will be available if you want to chat. I'll turn the recording off, But if you want to chat privately, please feel free to do so. But thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, and see you all in a couple of weeks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.